Picture it's 1946. The deadliest war in history is finally over, and you're an American official. You're sitting across from a man responsible for things that words can't even describe. You've got proof he ran a program that murdered thousands of men, women, and children. And not on some battlefield, but on operating tables, in test chambers. You know for a fact he dissected people while they were alive, fully awake. You know he infected toddlers with plague and syphilis just to watch the diseases progress. You know he had prisoners' limbs frozen so solid they'd shatter like glass. The evidence is just overwhelming, meticulously documented by the perpetrators themselves. You could start war crimes trials tomorrow. You could see him hang.
But then, he offers you a deal. He tells you he'll give you everything. We're talking more than 20 years of exhaustive research, thousands of microscope slides showing how anthrax destroys human tissue, 8,000 pages of data on vivisection, autopsy reports, photographs, everything. He's offering data on plague, cholera, typhoid, a dozen other pathogens, all gathered in ways that, to you, are completely unthinkable. He's offering you knowledge your own scientists could never, ever get. And it's not because they aren't brilliant. It's because they're bound by ethics, by law, by basic human decency. This man had none of those constraints. He treated human beings like they were raw material, like disposable lab equipment. So the information he has, it's unique. It's a complete, systematic record of what happens when science has no morality at all. And to a nation that's just entering a new Cold War, where biological weapons are a terrifying new frontier, that kind of information is priceless. So, what do? Do you go for justice for his victims, or do you take the data to protect your nation's future? It's a horrifying choice. But here's the thing. It isn't hypothetical, because your government already made its decision. In secret, the United States struck a deal with the men who ran the largest, most brutal human experimentation program in history. And the consequences of that choice, well, they didn't just let monsters walk free. For 50 years, they helped erase their victims and their crimes from history itself. This is the story of Unit 731. It's a story about a secret deal where the currency wasn't money, it was data. Data bought with thousands of human lives. And it's about the price of silence. A silence that was bought by one superpower, maintained by another, and that continues to haunt the search for justice to this very day. Back in 1925, the nations of the world were horrified by the chemical warfare of World War I. So they signed the Geneva Protocol, banning biological and chemical weapons. Most military leaders saw a moral red line. But a brilliant, ambitious, and utterly ruthless Japanese army doctor named Shirō Ishii, he saw a strategic opening. Ishii was a medical prodigy, known for his charm and a relentless drive. So in 1928, the army sent him on a tour of the West to see how other nations were preparing for the next war. When he came back to Japan, Ishii's pitch to the Imperial Army was just chillingly simple. He didn't argue that Japan should ignore the treaty. He argued they should exploit it. The treaty, he said, was a gentleman's agreement. It created a false sense of security. Because our enemies, America, Britain, China, are publicly saying they won't use these weapons, they won't bother developing defenses against them. He said an attack would be devastating, unstoppable, and decisive. He wanted to weaponize the deadliest diseases on Earth, and he used international law as his main selling point. The army was sold. By 1936, Ishii had a secret base in occupied Manchuria, China, and a nearly unlimited budget. He just needed one more thing, a steady supply of human test subjects. Inside this massive secret complex, the prisoners were stripped of everything, their names, their identities, their humanity. They were given a new name, Maruta. The word means logs, like lumber you'd get from a sawmill. And this wasn't just some cruel slang. According to historian Hal Gold, this was official policy. The prisoners, who were mostly Chinese, but also Russians, Koreans, and maybe even some Allied POWs, were seen as raw material. A former unit member, Naoji Wazano, recalled how it worked. He said, "When a new truckload arrived, someone would shout, 'Fresh logs today.' To us, they were not human. They were logs. When a log was used up, it was to be disposed of." So what actually happened inside Unit 731? Well, it wasn't random violence. Ishii ran the place with the cold efficiency of a modern corporation. He set up different departments, each one specializing in a particular kind of cruelty. There was pathology, bacteriology, and field testing. As historian Sheldon Harris put it in his book Factories of Death, this was an industrial complex where the only product was human suffering, all of it disguised as scientific and military progress. The scale of the experiments was just vast. But 3 programs in particular really show you the different layers of the horror. Vivisection shows the up-close, personal cruelty of the scientists. The plague bombs showed the terrifying scale of their ambition for mass murder. And the frostbite experiments, they reveal a detached, methodical sadism in the name of military research.
Let's start with vivisection. Prisoners would be deliberately infected with diseases like plague or anthrax. Then, at different stages of the illness, they'd be strapped to an operating table and cut open, while fully conscious. The researchers claimed that using anesthesia would contaminate the organs and ruin their data. They wanted to see, in real time, how a disease physically destroyed a living human body, from the inside out. In a 1995 New York Times investigation, a former Army medic named Ken Yuasa finally confessed what he'd done 50 years before. He said, "I cut open a living man. He was a Chinese prisoner. He was alive the entire time. I removed his stomach, his intestines. I'm ashamed, but I didn't." The shame came decades later. At the time, it was just standard procedure. This is a part of history that was buried on purpose. If this story is making you see history differently, hit subscribe, because we expose the stories that were meant to stay hidden.
And all those horrors inside the lab, they were just a means to an end. Ishii's ultimate goal was to wage war on a massive scale, not with bullets, but with bacteria. Unit 731 grew plague, anthrax, and cholera on an industrial level. They invented special ceramic bombs designed to shatter and spread infected fleas over entire cities. And after testing these on prisoners, they moved on to field tests on civilian populations. Japanese planes flew over Chinese cities like Quuzhou and Ningbo and dropped these plague bombs. This number you're seeing, 580,000, that's historian Sheldon Harris's high-end estimate for the total number of Chinese civilians killed by Japan's biological warfare program. These attacks started horrific epidemics that raged for years, killing people who never even knew they were part of the largest biological weapons trial in human history.
While some departments were weaponizing germs, another was weaponizing the cold itself. The frostbite research was led by a man named Hisato Yoshimura. His job was to find a better way to treat frostbite for Japanese soldiers in the brutal Manchurian winters. To do this, prisoners were taken outside in temperatures of -40 degrees. Their bare arms were doused with water and left exposed until the flesh was frozen solid. According to testimony, when a guard hit the frozen arms with a stick, they made a sound like a wooden board. Then, the researchers would test different ways of thawing them out. Hot water, snow, just letting them be. Of course, most of these logs died from shock and gangrene. Remember that name, Hisato Yoshimura. It's going to become very important later. This number, 12,000, represents the estimated human cost just inside Unit 731 and its other facilities. This is completely separate from the field tests. And the variety of experiments was sickening. In one building, prisoners were locked in pressure chambers until their eyes popped out. On another, they were tied to stakes near bombs to measure the effects of shrapnel on living bodies. There were starvation studies, dehydration studies, experiments where a prisoner's blood was replaced with horse blood. In the end, it's estimated that up to 12,000 men, women, and children were murdered inside these facilities. And the official policy was simple. No Maruta ever left Unit 731 alive.
Then, in August 1945, with the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war ended. Abruptly. And Shirō Ishii knew his time was up. He acted incredibly fast. He had the last few hundred prisoners executed. He gave his staff cyanide pills and told them to take the secret to your graves. He dynamited the main buildings to destroy the evidence, but he saved the one thing that was most valuable, the research data. Ishii and his top scientists just melted back into civilian life all across Japan. But as American intelligence moved in, they started hearing whispers about a massive human experimentation program. They found Ishii, and that brought them right back to that terrible original question. The cover-up happened, and it happened fast. As you can see, right after the war ends in 1945, the evidence starts being destroyed. By 1947, American interest was growing. The U.S. sent 2 scientists from its own bioweapons lab at Fort Detrick, Dr. Edwin Hill and Dr. Joseph Fichter, to Japan to interview Ishii and see what he had. They were horrified. But as scientists entering the Cold War, they were also intrigued. By 1948, their reports had gone up the chain of command, and a top-secret deal was struck. General Douglas MacArthur's headquarters granted full blanket immunity to Shirō Ishii and every single one of his men in exchange for exclusive access to all their research. The justification for this is laid out right here in the now declassified Hill-Victor report. The report stated, and I'm quoting, "Evidence gathered in this investigation has been of a gruesome nature, but it was the opinion of the investigators that the value to the U.S. of Japanese BW data is of such importance to national security as to far outweigh the value accruing from war crimes prosecution. They noted the data was priceless because, in their words, it could not have been obtained in our own laboratories because of the scruples attached to experiments on humans. The word they used for the moral ban on vivisecting a child was scruples. That was the official reason for trading justice for data. If you believe the truth, no matter how uncomfortable must be told, make sure you're subscribed to our channel."
So the deal was done. Ishii and his team handed over their data. In return, they got immunity, and the United States began a 50-year cover-up, systematically lying to the public, to the world, and even to its own government agencies about what they knew. Ishii himself was never arrested, never tried. He lived out his life in Japan and died of throat cancer in 1959. But the story actually gets worse. The perpetrators didn't just escape justice. They became rich, powerful, and respected members of society. This slide just shows you the direct path from war criminal to elite member of society. Remember Hisato Yoshimura, the frostbite researcher? He became a professor and later the president of the prestigious Kyoto Prefectural University of Medicine. He was even awarded one of Japan's highest imperial honors. Masaji Kitano, another commander of Unit 731, became the head of Green Cross, one of Japan's biggest pharmaceutical companies. Ryoichi Naito, another officer, co-founded the Japan Blood Bank, which later merged with Green Cross. Countless others became deans of medical schools, heads of academic societies, powerful executives. They built celebrated careers on a foundation of torture and murder, with the quiet, full complicity of both the Japanese and American governments. And this complicity led to a deliberate, global amnesia. We all remember the Holocaust, as we absolutely must. It's taught in our schools, there are museums and memorials all over the world, there's a global promise of never again. The machinery of Unit 731, the dehumanization, the industrialized medical murder, the gas chambers, the crematoria, was shockingly similar to that of the Nazis. And yet for decades, these crimes were met with almost total silence. And this was no accident. During the Cold War, the U.S. cared more about keeping the bioweapons data away from the Soviets than it did about prosecuting Japanese war criminals. And post-war Japan, as a key American ally, was protected from having to truly face its past. The victims weren't just murdered. Their memories were systematically erased for geopolitical convenience. Look, the evidence isn't hidden anymore. Thanks to tireless work by historians and journalists, declassified documents from the U.S. National Archives started coming out in the 1990s. A 2007 report to the U.S. Congress explicitly confirmed the policy of protecting these war criminals. In 2002, a Japanese court finally acknowledged that Unit 731 existed and used biological warfare, which was a huge moment. But in that same ruling, it denied the victims' families any compensation or an official apology from the Japanese government. To this day, unlike Germany's extensive atonement for Nazi crimes, there has been no formal, comprehensive apology from Japan to the victims of Unit 731. There has been no real reckoning. So, all of this leaves us with a final, deeply unsettling thought. The initial question was about a choice between justice and data. But the real story is about what happened after that choice was made. The decades of denial, the celebrated careers of mass murderers, the silent graves of their victims. The question isn't why this was covered up anymore. We know why. The question is, why, even after the truth came out, the world has largely chosen to look away? What calculus of power, politics, and convenience decides which atrocities get memorials and which are allowed to just fade into footnotes? What decides which victims we remember and which ones we all collectively agree to forget?